I know this is a weird way to do this because I'm really finishing up the conversation we had on Monday with just this one slide here. I remember on Monday we talked about theories of global governance, we talked about rationalist models, and we talked about constructivist models. I'm going to have you, if you can't remember, go back to your notes, reread it, because I'm going to just start from that last slide just to keep this short. And I just want to show you these models in action. And we're going to use a very broad question. It's a really important global governance question, and that is this. Why don't states break treaties that they sign? Famously, John Mearsheimer said, treaties are just pieces of paper. That's really all they are, right? It's this piece of paper which has all these things. So two or more states get down there and they sign their names on it. And what's to keep them from breaking the treaty? There's not a third-party government out there. There's not like a global government that will come down and punish them for breaking a treaty. If I break my treaty with Point Loma, the government steps in and does something. That doesn't happen at the global level. So the question becomes, why do states even bother with treaties if there's nothing there to enforce them, I guess you could say? There's no reason, how do I say this? That states probably have lots of incentives to break treaties. How come they don't? And here's what we find. What we find is that states rarely break treaties. It's very, very rare that a state will break a treaty. And usually if they do break the treaty, they almost always break the treaty in a way that the treaty itself allows you to break the treaty by essentially canceling it. I know that sounds like a weird thing, but even that, it's not a violation of the treaty. It's just, canceling it. So, why don't states break treaties they sign? Realism. They totally can. Now, they rarely do, but they can if it's in their interest. Remember, realism is all about power. And so this model, and again, one of the rationalist models, so we're just thinking about incentives. What's the incentives to do something? The state does a cost-benefit calculation. It says, look, here are the costs if we break the treaty. Here are the benefits if we break the treaty. Here are the costs if we stay with the treaty. Here's the benefits if we stay with the treaty. Now, which one's better for us? Let's do that. And a lot of this for the realist is about power. Like a powerful state like the United States, again, according to this theory, can break treaties, whereas, say, Bangladesh just doesn't have the ability to break the treaty because the costs would be so high. If the state gains more by abiding by the treaty, it will abide by the treaty. Now, the reason why, according to this, states rarely break treaties is because states will rarely sign treaties that they'll want to break. That's sort of the idea there. All right. Liberalism is going to say they almost never break treaties. And why? States almost never break treaties because it's way too costly to break treaties. Now let me just explain this here. It's going to be the same as realism above. So everything we just saw above there, state's going to do that cost-benefit calculation. Except the longer the treaty is in place, the more costly it is to break. Okay, so relationship analogy. You guys ready for this? On date number 1, okay, you just met this person in a coffee shop. How easy is it to say at the end of the day, you know what, we gave it a try, I'm not feeling you, I'm out of here. How easy is that to sort of just say, this was enough, we're done with each other. We're, I guess, breaking the treaty. Our relationship, whatever that is over. On date 1, it's totally easy. In fact, you could almost send a text or just ghost the person and job done, right? No big deal. Now, imagine that you've been dating this person for a month. Okay, you've been maybe out, 10 times. How easy is it to break up with that person? The answer is it's a little more difficult. You got to have the DTR. You're not just going to send a text because that is super douchey. You're going to have to do something, sort of face to face to sort of call it off. Now imagine this is that you've essentially been married for 3 years. You got a couple kids. Ooh, after 3 years, all right. Maybe you've been married for 5 years and you got a couple kids, and you got a dog, you got a house, joint bank account. How easy is it to say, I'm done with this? The answer is it's a lot harder at that point. And the reason why is because there are more and more sort of links between the two that makes it costly to just say, I'm done with it. You essentially shaped who you are and added costs to this that, I can totally walk away from my wife, but who's going to take care of the kids? What's going to happen there? How's that going to psychologically damage them? Who's going to get the house? Who's going to get the dog? We can cut the dog in half and I get half the dog and you get to have the dog. Like, how are you going to do this? It's way more complicated. And so, not often, but it can essentially make the decision to stay together more likely than it would have been on date number one. It's also costly to break a treaty because you lose this sort of, what's the word? You're not seen as reliable anymore. So will other states sign treaties with you? The point here that I want to make is that it's costly. That's the decision here. It's not because it's right or wrong to break the treaty. You do what's in your interest, but what's in your interest is determined by cost benefit. And for the liberal, the longer the treaty goes on, the more costly it is just to sort of break it. For the constructivists, they almost never do, but it's a very different thing. It's not because it's costly, it's because it's wrong to do so. So there's this norm in international relations called Pax Sunt Servanda that essentially just says treaties ought to be obeyed. And another way to think about this is if you are a state that doesn't stand by your treaties, then you're not really a quote-unquote state, because that's not how states behave. I know that sounds like a weird way of putting it, but it's just sort of what it means to be a state is that if you sign treaties, you abide by them. If you don't want to abide by treaties, then maybe you're not really a state. I know that sounds super weird to say it that way because you actually are a state, but you sort of lose a little bit of, I don't know what the word is. I guess we could go back to terms like duty, and we can go to terms like norms and things like that. So that's sort of the essential difference between these different models. That will make more sense as we start looking at our projects, where your particular project is in sort of time. Is it early on, like we just started talking about this problem that you're bringing up, and so people don't think it's a duty to do something about it? Or are we later in the process where a lot of people think, for example, human trafficking? Human trafficking, let's say 30 years ago, maybe it's about costs and things like that. Today, it's really a norm thing where people just say, that sucks. That should not be the case, regardless of the costs. Okay, that's it. Have you watch a video, and then we'll sort of finish up the lecture from Wednesday.